I'm actually kind of quiet off stage. A lot of people don't realize that. I was at a dinner party recently. A bunch of people that I don't know. One guy talking plenty for everybody. Me, myself, right, and then I, and then myself, right, me. I couldn't tell this one about I because I was talking about myself, and then me. Beware the me monster. So I tried to jump in with a little story. I don't want to just sit there the whole night. Right when I'm done with my story, this guy goes, "That ain't nothing." Oh, well, didn't mean to waste everybody's time telling my nothing story. Here, let Marco Polo speak. He's back with tales of adventure. My story ain't nothing. Maybe it wasn't, because I made the mistake of trying to tell a story about having only 2 wisdom teeth pulled, and I learned a lesson. Don't ever try to tell a 2 wisdom tooth story, because you ain't going nowhere. The 4 wisdom teeth people are going to parachute in and cut you off at the pass. Halt! Halt with your 2 wisdom tooth tale. You will never complete one, trust me. I'm trying to tell my story. You know, I had some wisdom teeth pulled. I had 4 pulled. Oh, okay. No 5, no 9. I had 9 wisdom teeth pulled. All of mine were impacted. They were all coming upside down. The roots are wrapped around my tongue, coming out my nose. They were tusks. I was a warthog. No anesthesia. They pulled them out with pliers. I was eating corn on the cob that afternoon. Pin the blue ribbon upon his chest. That knocks the socks off of my wisdom tooth tail. Why do people need to top other people? I've never understood it, and I see it all the time. Obviously, people get something out of it. At best, people wait for your lips to stop. Yeah, as soon as... Okay, you, me! You, me! You see the difference? You see that? Now I do. What is it about the human condition? People get something out of that. That's why I have a social fantasy. I wish I was one of the 12 astronauts who have been on our moon. They must love knowing they can beat anybody's story whenever they want. They can sit back quietly at a dinner party while some other person, some me monster's doing his thing, and let him go. Let him run with the line while you be quiet. Oh, really? Let him have his moment. Yeah, I'm a big traveler. I have my business. I got my own global enterprise I got to check on. You know, driving in the Autobahn because I keep a fleet of sports cars over in Zurich. You know, there's a Swiss account that I want to check out. Mount Kilimanjaro expedition, might have to cancel that. You know, runways in Aspen are a lot shorter the first time you go in there. You know, the Pacific Rim Company, we're going to try to take that over. And global enterprise. I walked on the moon. Well, you have the floor, moonwalker. You know, you mentioned driving on the Autobahn. That reminded me. Once I was driving in the Sea of Tranquility. In my lunar rover. And I, too, was worried about our speed till I remembered, wait, we're the only ones on the moon. You guys are great. Thank you very much.
Man, it'd be great if I could just let him talk the whole time and still get paid. So let me ask you, what's the greatest thing that you could achieve in life? Now, what's the greatest thing you could achieve in life? You got people always competing. Oh, I did this, I did that. I've accomplished all this, and I've accomplished all that. And what's the greatest thing that you could ever do, that you could ever achieve in life? All right? Does it have something to do with athletics? That's the best thing that that's my goal. And the greatest thing I could achieve is someday if I was a professional athlete, that'd be the greatest achievement I could do. And that would be incredible. I mean, professional athletes they can do incredible things with their body. They have such control. I remember I saw a video one time of a professional quarterback. It was like a series of videos just on like how good, athletes really are. And so there's this quarterback, and he had two wide receivers, one on each side, and they both started running. He threw a football way up in the air, then took another football and he threw it, just bulleted it, and he hit the first football on the way down and split them and hit both wide receivers as they were running. I mean, just outrageous, just incredible that you could do something like that. Is that the greatest thing really that you could do? Maybe the greatest thing you could do has something to do with success. You reach the top of your field. You walk on the moon, something great that you've done in life with your business, something financial you've done, just the top of whatever you are that you're interested in. I got to the top of that, and that could be the greatest thing I ever did. Is that the greatest achievement that you could ever have in this life? What's the greatest thing that you could ever achieve in this life? I want to suggest this morning that the greatest achievement that anyone could ever have in life is to know God. And that's only true if God's real, right? Like if God's not real, what are we doing? We're just wasting our time. I might as well be, sitting at home, relaxing. But if He's real, if there's a God who made everything, if there's a God who created the universe, created me, if there's a God who's all-powerful, all-knowing, then the greatest thing I could ever do would be to know Him. Because if I became a professional athlete, if I was the star player on an NBA team or the quarterback in an NFL, if I became a professional athlete, but I didn't know God, and because of my lifestyle, because of the way I lived, I scorned His image and I ticked God off, I mean, that would be pretty worthless then, right? Who cares if I'm a professional athlete? There's a God out there who, in His eyes, I'm nothing more than a speck of dust, and I made Him angry. So who cares if I'm a professional athlete? It doesn't matter what you achieve. If there's a God out there who made everything, who is over everything, who is king of everything, then nothing else is worth not knowing Him. Nothing else could be greater than being in a relationship with that God. If God is real, then the greatest thing you could ever do in life is to know Him. The greatest thing you could ever do in life is to know Him. Now, I want to keep this in mind. We're going to switch gears just for a second, but keep that in mind. If God's real, the greatest achievement you could ever have in life is to know Him. We're doing a sermon series, and we're continuing that through the Sermon on the Mount. And today we're starting the Beatitudes. Now, there's 4 Beatitudes. There's 8. We're talking about 4 this morning. And the first 4, the reason I did that is because I believe the first 4 have to do with kind of our relationship with God, and then the last 4 is kind of our relationship with others. I think this is kind of the intro to the sermon. Like Jesus is a good preacher. He's kind of setting this up, and he says, we're going to talk about you and God, you and people, and then we're going to kind of just expound on that the rest of the sermon. So today we're talking about the first 4 Beatitudes. I'm going to start out, I'm just going to read them real quick. Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 6. And it says this, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied." Now, this word blessed pops up a lot, so we probably should figure that out. Beatitude comes from the Latin beati, which means blessed or whatever. The only reason that has anything to do with anything is because the church for 1,000 years used Latin for their Bible translations. The Bible was originally written in Greek, though. The New Testament was originally written in Greek. So in Greek, this word is makarios. I know, another Greek word, right? We've talked about that every time I think I've preached so far. What's really funny is I hated Greek in college. So, if you're in college or whatever, you actually do use some of the stuff when you get out of it. But anyway, this Greek word makarios, I don't really like the way most Bibles translate it as blessed. Because that sounds like God sits up there and says, you know what, if you're crying, I'm going to bless you. You know what? So to get God's blessing, I better go out and start doing some crying. You know what I mean? Like that, I don't know, that doesn't really fit very well. In the ancient world, this word was used more of a kind of congratulations. It was kind of you're in a good situation, okay? This was used to talk about the gods because they didn't have to put up with life here. They didn't have to work. They didn't have to, mow their lawn in 100 degrees. They didn't have to toil. They didn't have to worry about dying. They didn't have to worry about any of that. So, hey, they're in a good spot. Man, they are fortunate. They are in a good position. This was used about the rich for the same reason. This was used about people who died for the same reason. They don't have to put up with life anymore. They're in a good situation. This word was used if you just had a baby. Congratulations. Good job. That's really fortunate. You just have a son. Now your family line can go on. Congratulations. This was used if you got promoted. If I lived back then and I had just gotten this job, people would be writing me and saying, Cody, I heard you got a good new job. Makarios. Congratulations. You are blessed. You are in a good position. And now knowing that, does this sound weird to anyone then? Like, does this sound strange? Jesus says, you're in a good situation when you're poor. You're in a good situation, those of you who are mourning, who have lost someone and are weeping over them. You're in a good situation if you're meek and you're humble and you're lowly. And you're in a good situation if you're hungry and you're thirsty and all you want is righteousness. Doesn't that sound like a little paradoxical? Doesn't that sound a little messed up? You are in a good situation, those of you who are poor in spirit. That doesn't always necessarily mean what we think it means. Poor in spirit has to do with we don't think that we have anything to stand on when we come before God. That's what a poor in spirit person is. See, a rich in spirit person, that they come before God and they say, hey, God, look at all the stuff I did. Look at all the things I accomplished. Look how good I was. Now, let me in. That's a rich in spirit person. A poor in spirit person stands before God and they say what Isaiah said when he got a vision of God in the Old Testament, and he said, woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and I saw God. Woe is me. I don't deserve to be here. Why am I here? Woe is me. The poor in spirit are those who are so lowly, they realize, I am wretched. There's no reason I should get to see God. No reason. Jesus says you're in a good position, those of you who mourn. You're in a good, happy are the unhappy, basically Jesus says here. You're in a good position if you've just lost a son, a spouse, or a parent, and you're mourning over them. Congratulations. Mourning here doesn't, Jesus, again, he isn't commanding you to go out and cry. My wife was at a church. She was visiting with a friend once, and they were doing a sermon series through the Beatitudes. They were doing one sermon on every Beatitude, which is a little too much, I think. But they did it on this one verse. And they said, you know what, as a Christian, we just need to go out and have a good cry. Like crying's like a virtue. Like that's a good thing to do. We need to do it, just go out and have a good cry. And I thought, man, that alienates anyone in the audience that's like me, which I don't cry at anything, If we ever have a dog or a pet and we have to one day put it down, I'll be like, yeah, that's okay. I'll go do it. Just because I don't do that. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's not saying go out and just cry, son. He's saying those of you who are in a situation that deserves mourning, that's a good situation. Does that sound a little paradoxical? He says, congratulations, you're in a good situation if you're meek. And meekness doesn't necessarily mean weakness, but in the ancient world it was looked down upon, much like it would be today. How are you going to get ahead in life? How are you going to get ahead in your business? How are you going to get ahead at school? How are you going to get ahead in anything that you do if you don't take from others? If you don't seize any opportunity, whether it's moral or not? How are you going to get ahead in life if you don't somehow put other people down? Right? Someone's got to go down and to have someone else rise. This is the opposite of that. Again, I'm not saying people are just, don't want to get ahead or don't have dreams or anything, but these are people who say, you know what, I will never sacrifice someone else for me. I'm meek, humble. These are people who get taken advantage of. These are people who other people say, you know what, I'm going to ride over top of them to get to where I want to go. And Jesus says, hey, you're in a good position. Congratulations. The last one makes the most sense, doesn't it? Congratulations, you're in a good position, those of you who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Like that's something that we could preach. Go hunger and thirst for righteousness. Except that righteousness, sometimes we confuse that with just, being a good person or a churchy person. That's not what Jesus meant. Righteousness in the ancient world had a lot to do with justice, God's justice. So people who hunger and thirst for righteousness are people who see the world, they see how broken things are in the world, and they ache for that. These are people who are miserable because they realize that there are people in another country, real human beings, fathers, mothers, daughters, sons, who are sold into slavery, who are forced to join the military when they're 11, 12, 13. And they see that and they just say, that is unimaginable. I just want God's justice to come. I want God to come and intervene in that. I need God. I want God's righteousness here on earth because there's so much bad. And that's a good thing, but it's miserable. And Jesus says, you're in a good position if you're like that. Why? What makes all of these such good things? Why are these good circumstances to be in? If God is real, then the greatest thing you can ever do is know Him. And it's much, much easier to know God if you are in need. You see, the needy people, they understand what it means to not have enough on their own. They understand what it means to not have everything that they could ever want. And so they are in need. They are desperate. And that is more likely, you are in a good situation because you are more likely to find God in that situation. The rich, they got everything they need. Why do they need? They don't need God. I got everything I need, so they don't go looking. They don't need to submit to anyone else. I'm in charge of 500 people. I don't need to submit to Christ. I got everything I need. But Jesus says, no, you're in a good situation. Blessed are you. Not if you're in charge of a mega corporation. Not if you're, the king or the governor or a prince. No, not blessed are you. No, blessed are those who are poor, the down and out, the meek. Why? Because they're closer to achieving the greatest thing you can possibly achieve. That's why Jesus says it's hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Why? Because they don't need it to. They don't need to do that. The greatest thing, if God's real, the greatest thing that could ever happen to you is to know God. And it's much easier to come to that conclusion if you're in need. If you desperately need something to lean on because you can't do it on your own. If you're in need, that's a much easier conclusion to come to. And I see a warning and an encouragement here. The greatest thing that you could ever do is to know God. And I think that in this idea of Jesus says, you're in a good position, those of you who are down and out, because you are closer to knowing God than people who aren't down and out. And I think there's a warning and an encouragement here. The warning is this: we live in America, which automatically means we're rich. Right? We may not think we are. And I'm not going to deny that there are actual, severe cases of poverty here, but 95% of us are rich compared to everyone else in the world. Right? Like, I've got a roof over my head, I've got clothes on my back, I've got plenty of food to eat, way too much food to eat. I've got, places to go, I've got entertainment, I've got a nice TV, I've got plenty of movies, I've got video games, I've got computer, internet, I've got all these things. I've got air conditioning. What else do I need? Why would I need to get out? Like, why would I need to go to church? Why do I need to seek God? Why not just lay on my couch, turn on the TV, and watch my Chiefs lose? Like, why not do that? I don't need to go do anything else. I don't need God because I've got so much already. And that's the warning here. In fact, in Luke chapter 6, there's a parallel sermon to Matthew's. And in Luke chapter 6, he has some Beatitudes there. He's only got 4, though, but he immediately has 4 woes. 4, look out, be careful. All 4 of those woes are directed at rich people. Not because God hates rich people, but because he's saying, be careful. If you're rich, it's much, much easier to walk away from God. It's much easier to never know God because I don't need him. I don't need him. The poor understand what need is. The oppressed understand what need is. It's interesting that in the early, a couple hundred years ago, when slavery was, still legal and it was really prominent, we had all these issues and everything. white Americans called America the New Israel. Slaves called America the New Egypt. And they knew what that was like. And they knew their need for salvation, their need for help, their need for deliverance, their need for God. And it's so easy for us who are rich to just overlook that. I don't need God. And you go through life without ever achieving the greatest thing you could ever do, which is to be in a relationship with God. That's the warning. The encouragement, the exhortation here is this. Let's be people who minister to the down and out. Let's be people who keep that in mind. Why? Because they always have a special place in God's heart. Again, it's not that God hates rich people or anything like that. No, not at all. But it's that most people overlook the homeless. Most people overlook the poor. Most people overlook the depressed. I don't want to deal with that. That's messy. Especially in America, we have this idea of they got themselves there, right? Like they made poor choices. They could just make some good choices and get out of it. Who cares what choices they made? Who cares what they're doing right now? How does that affect me helping someone? Let's have a place. Let's be a church. Let's be a group of people who keeps in mind that we minister to those who are down and out. That we minister to those who are poor. We minister to those who are in mourning. And again, I'm not saying we forget those of us who have successes. I want to rejoice with that too. In fact, Romans chapter 12, verse 15, Paul says, be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. Let's be those kind of people. One of us in the congregation has a great success. We get promoted. Congratulations. Let's rally around that. There shouldn't be any jealousy or envy. That's wonderful. Absolutely. Someone in the congregation loses a family member, loses a job. Let's do whatever it takes to help that person. God has such a special place in his heart for the poor. God has such a special place in his heart for those that are overlooked. And when we as a church don't have that place as well, we're not really following God very well then. Let's care about what God cares about. That's the encouragement. Let's do what God does. Let's go where Jesus went. Jesus went to people that were on the outside of society, tax collectors, okay, sinners. I don't mean to rub on anyone's toes who's like a tax collector or something. I actually had a person in a past church, and I gave this big lecture on why tax collectors were hated in the ancient world, and then she, at the end of the service, was like, I'm a tax collector. And I was like, oh, sorry. But Jesus went to those on the outside, right? He said the sick need a doctor, not the healthy. So let's be that kind of church. Let's be the church where we minister to those who are on the down and out. Be the church that ministers to those who are mourning, poor, the lowly. Let's be that kind of church. That's the exhortation. These Beatitudes here this morning, they're not prescriptive. Okay? Some people think that you got to do this to get into the kingdom of heaven. You got to go out and be mournful. You got to go out and get poor. You got to go out and all these things. Like you have to do this to get into heaven. That's not what they're saying. These are not prescriptive, they're descriptive. If you are poor, if you are lowly, if you are mourning, congratulations to you. Why? Because you're close to making it in. And if you decide to follow Jesus, if you decide to follow God, those are the rewards. So you're poor. You decide, you know what, I need God. I'm poor in spirit. I can't do it on my own. I'm a wretched, wretched man. Paul himself, the guy that wrote most of our New Testament, says, I am a wretched man. Woe is me. Yes, he wrote most of our New Testament. I'm never going to do that. He thought he was pretty wretched. Well, you realize that and you say, you know what, I need God. So you come to God and God says, you know what, you're going to get the kingdom of heaven. You're mourning. You lost someone. You lost a child. You lost a spouse. You lost a parent. You lost a job. You lost a friend. And you know what God says? You know what? I'm right there. I know you're in need. If you come to me with your need, I promise to comfort you. I promise, I swear, I will wipe every tear from your eye. That's what it says in Revelation. You come to me, I will wipe every tear from your eye, and you will never have pain again in the next life. I I promise. Those of you who are lowly, down and out, never get anywhere in life because you never do the wrong thing. You won't take anything from anyone else. God says, you come to me in your need, I'll give you the earth. You never had much in this life, I'll let you inherit the earth. And he says to those of you who really want righteousness, you want justice done in your life. These are the people who know wrong when they do it, and they just say, I can't believe I did that again. I wish I was more righteous. I wish righteousness was done around me. God says, come to me. If you come to me, you'll be filled. That word filled doesn't just mean like I had enough. It means stuffed. It's what you did to fatten up animals. You're going to be filled to the brim. These are people who need God. And Jesus says, if you're in that situation, congratulations. Because you are close to achieving the greatest thing that anyone could ever do in life. And that's to know the God who made them. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for the sending of your Son so that we could come to you. You loved us so much that you did not wait for us to get our act together, but you sent us a rescue mission. Thank you, Father. God, we just ask that we can be weary of our position. We can be aware that our stuff, our things that we have here, that they can come between us, that they can block you out because we have enough. We don't need anything else. And God, we just ask that you stir in our hearts a passion to be a people who ministers to those who are down and out. God, may we all realize that the greatest thing that anyone could ever do is to know you. And once we realize that, we'll realize the importance of introducing other people to you as well. We love you, God, and we ask this in your Son's name. Amen. Turn to our time of invitation this morning. And, this sermon plugs right into that. That God cares about everyone. In fact, that's one of the reasons that God's caring and love and provision for the poor is so often mentioned in the Bible. To show us there's no one that God doesn't care about. You would think that the gods would be really impressed with the rich and the mighty. Hercules, Odysseus, all right? These great heroes. Yeah, the gods take notice of them. Look at all they did. Slaying mighty creatures and saving damsels in distress. But why would God ever be interested in me? I'm just a bricklayer. I'm just a carpenter. Why would God ever be interested in me? And one of the great things about this is that the Bible says He is. He is interested in you. He cares about you deeply. So no matter where you're at this morning, I just want to say that this is our time of invitation. If you want to come forward and give your life to Christ, that would be wonderful. We'll talk to you about that and what all that means. If you want to come forward just because you need someone to pray with you, we'd love to do that as well. This is our time of invitation. Let's all stand as we sing. I'm going to apologize in advance. That's a good way to start a sermon. I'm going to apologize in advance for being a tad long. If you had a date at noon at Van Steakhouse, you might not make it exactly on that time. Someone once said that long sermons are just lazy sermon writers who couldn't make it shorter. It's harder to make a short sermon than a long sermon. So maybe I was lazy, or maybe there's just enough here that it just had to be long. There's just so much good stuff. We'll go with that. There's so much good stuff here. I couldn't cut anything out. We're going to start out, and I'm just going to read Matthew chapter 5. We're going to start at verse 7, and we're going to go through verse 12. It says this: Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. Blessed are those who work for peace, for they will be called the children of God. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. Now, can anyone remember what kind of the theme was from last week? I know we've all slept since then, and I barely remember what happened a week ago. But last week, I kind of tried to have this theme that knowing God was the greatest thing anyone could ever achieve in life. That out of all the things that you could do, out of everything you could accomplish, out of everything you could accumulate, out of anything you could do in this life, knowing God was the greatest thing among them. Because if God's real, if there's a creator out there, an infinite, all-powerful God, then it makes sense that knowing Him trumps anything else I could ever do. But knowing Him is a little bit different than just knowing He's out there. All right? Knowing Him, the knowing is a little bit different. It's like this. If your spouse sits you down and says, you know what, I feel like you don't know me at all, it's a really bad answer to go, of course I do. Your name's Tiffany. You know? That's not what they're talking about. That's not going to go over well. Knowing your spouse, they say, you don't know me at all. That means you don't know, I feel like you don't know what I like and dislike, what my hopes and dreams are, what I'm afraid of, what makes me laugh and what makes me cry. I feel like you don't know me. That's more than just knowing their name. That's more than just recognizing, yeah, you're my wife, aren't you? That's more than just picking a face out. That's knowing them. And the only way you get to know them is through a series of actions. You go on dates with them, you spend time with them, you do activities with them, you talk with them, you share with them. There's all these things that go into knowing someone. And that's the same way when we talk about knowing God. You see, faith in God isn't just knowing He's out there. In fact, the author of the book of James says that demons know God's out there. All right? So that's not the team I want to be on. I don't want to be like, I got faith in God, I got the same faith demons have. That's not necessarily the team I want to be with. Knowing that He exists isn't really enough. Knowing God is about more than that. It's about having a relationship with God. There are things that go into that. There are aspects, things that go into the Christian life other than just saying, I think God's real. And last week we talked about the first 4 Beatitudes here. Because I believe that they were broken up into 2 categories. Those first 4 are about us and God. And we talked about all those people, all those descriptions of the poor and the meek and the lowly and those who are desperate for righteousness. All those people are close to knowing God because they know what it is to need Him. And if knowing God's the greatest thing ever, then being close to knowing God is a good situation to be in. There are rich and powerful people out there. There are people who have it all, who never cry. They're always happy because they have every comfort in life. And that's a little harder to find God in that situation, because why do you need Him? So Jesus says, blessed are you when you're meek and when you're mourning, because you're close to finding God. And that's the greatest thing that could ever happen to you. But you see, knowing God is about a little bit more than just saying, oh yeah, He's out there. Knowing God means living like Jesus lived. Knowing God means following Him, trying to be a real, true human, the way He created you to be. And there's no better example of that than Jesus. So knowing God is about living the way Jesus lived. Knowing God is about living the way Jesus lived. And Jesus here, these last 4 Beatitudes, He gives us a description. Those first 4 about us and God and being in a good, favorable circumstance to come to know God. And these last 4, I think, are about now that you know God, now here's what you do. Here's kind of an overview of good Christian life. Because here's the idea. You may think you know God, but then if you aren't actually living any differently, you're not really in a good circumstance. Remember, we talked about the word blessed as having favorable circumstances. Knowing God is the greatest thing ever. But if you're just running around living your normal everyday life, no different from anyone else, then do you really know God? So Jesus goes on to describe here are things that my followers, that people in my kingdom ought to do. And the first thing is he says, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. You're in a good situation if you're merciful, for you will be shown mercy. And as we look about these things, I think we can just go through Jesus' life, really, and look, how was Jesus like this? Because I believe He practiced what He taught. So if He says, you know what, if you want to be a good follower of God, if you want to be in the kingdom, be merciful. Jesus was merciful. He was very merciful. In fact, you think of someone who has a lot of mercy and kindness and goodness and love. I mean, you think of Jesus, right? That's kind of the top up there on the list of people who are full of mercy and kindness and goodness. But we have kind of a poor definition of mercy, don't we? Like, when I think of mercy, I picture me pinning my sibling down, like twisting their arm into some terrible position. Like, I can hear the tendons popping and getting as much pain as I can out of them before they say mercy, and then you stop. I'm going to stop doing that then. Right? Like the mercy rule in high school sports, thank goodness it exists, but that's, you can't score any more points once you go up so much. That's it. You're already ahead by, 1,000 points. There's no point, in going on anymore. We're just going to quit keeping track. So mercy for us is a lot about not doing something, quitting something. But that's not what the New Testament describes as mercy. That's not really what Jesus describes as mercy or his life. Mercy isn't about turning something off. Mercy isn't about building a dam. It's about going out. It's about goodness going out. It's about breaking down a dam. It's about doing things, gifts of mercy for others. In fact, just a couple chapters later in Matthew chapter 8, we see a great example of this. Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. I'm just going to read it real quick. It says this, that large crowds were following Jesus as he came down from the mountainside. And suddenly a man with leprosy approached him and knelt before him. Lord, the man said, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus reached out and he touched him. I am willing, he said. Be healed. And instantly the leprosy disappeared. And then Jesus said to him, don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest and let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. This will be a public testimony that you have been cleaned. Jesus' mercy was active. It was a gift. It was going out. He had mercy on this poor individual. Not just in the fact that he healed him, but you notice he specifically touched the man. Leprosy in the ancient world oftentimes was like the disease we call leprosy today, but it could be a word that just meant any skin disease. Any skin, irritation or discrepancy, rotting, anything that happened to your skin would be considered leprosy, and you weren't supposed to touch those people. They were unclean. You stay away from them. In fact, they had to yell out, I'm a leper, get away, get away. Everywhere they went, they had to tell people they were a leper because you weren't supposed to touch them. And Jesus specifically walks up to this man and he says, I am willing to heal you. And he touches the man to heal him. The first time the guy's probably been touched by a healthy human being in years because you weren't supposed to do that. The mindset of the day was uncleanness, badness comes from people and gets on you. Jesus' idea was, no, I think goodness, cleanness can go out from me and get on other people. And too often we confuse mercy with not doing something instead of giving and doing something. You see, we think we're being pretty merciful when someone says something insulting or someone is rude and we bite our tongue, right? Like, oh, they deserve to hear, something from me, but you know what? I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to hold my tongue because I'm a merciful person. That's not mercy. No, mercy is encouraging. It's not just about not saying something. It's about saying something that is uplifting. It's about saying something that is good. That's mercy. Mercy isn't about just not striking the guy because he deserves it. Mercy is about serving the guy even though he doesn't deserve it. That is mercy. Jesus' mercy was to heal, to touch, to reach out to this man who is so far gone from society. No one would touch him. No one would look at him. No one would have anything to do with him. But Jesus did. That's an act of mercy. Mercy is about going out. And Jesus says you are in a good position if you're merciful because you will be shown mercy. Because there will be a time when you will stand before a throne, and on the throne will sit someone who is so perfect and so holy and so powerful that you will be terrified because you will realize how wretched you are. And then that being will say, well done, good and faithful servant. Come into your reward. You were merciful in life, so I will be merciful to you. Receive your gift. Jesus says, blessed are the merciful. And mercy is not about holding back, but about giving out. But Jesus wasn't just merciful. He goes on to describe someone who's pure in heart. Blessed are you whose hearts are pure, for you will see God. And again, when you think of purity, again, Jesus has got to be at the top of that list, right? Like a guy who has really had a pure heart. And I believe purity here has to do about motivations. Being pure in heart is about your motives for doing something. It's crystal clear water. You can see right down to the bottom of it. Water that's murky and kind of dirty. Pretty much any lake in Missouri, you can't see what's underneath it. You can't see what's down there. But that picturesque postcard from the tropics water, where you can see right down to the bottom of the beach. That's pure water. You can see right through it. They're transparent. Those who are pure in heart have pure motives. They're transparent. They're see-through. And there's no one else better than that with Jesus. I mean, even the text we just read in Matthew 8, where he says he heals this guy, he does something good, like that's a good thing, and then he says, hey, by the way, don't tell anyone what I just did. Right? Like he did something good, and then he could have, had the guy go and proclaim, hey, this Jesus guy, he healed me, he's a great guy, everyone go listen to him. But he specifically says, don't tell anyone. Because I did this because I care about you and I care about God's kingdom. I didn't do this because I want to be popular. How many times do we do something good? Something really good. Something that's hours of labor. We help someone out. We help our neighbor on our Saturday, our one day off. We help him reshingle his roof. What a great person I am. That's fantastic. But now I need to go let everyone know about it, right? Like I'm not just going to let this go. That was a great act. It can't be done in secret. So someone else is talking about, we find ways to bring it up. Someone else is talking about, a football game. And you go, oh, yeah. Speaking of that, Saturday I was spending my day reshingling my neighbor's roof. And you're like, I wasn't even talking about that. What are you saying? Because we find ways to brag about the good things that we do. Even if our motives are 80% pure, oftentimes there's that little, I'm not going to go out of my way to not let people know this. Jesus' motives were completely pure. In fact, later in John chapter 6, after Jesus feeds the multitudes, at the very end of that, the people are ready to make Jesus king by force, the text says. Now, Jesus claimed to be king of Israel. He wanted to be king of Israel. But the people were about to ready to make him king by force. And Jesus says, no, we're not going to do this. He breaks up the crowds and he sends them away. Why? Because the people wanted him to be a king to fight against the Romans. The Jews hated the Romans. They hated the Romans. And here's a guy who's prophet from God, so we got God on our side. He can heal all of our injured people, and he can give us food. Man, what a great general, am I right? Like anytime someone gets hurt, bam, Jesus is there. Anytime we're on a long trek, bam, Jesus has got our back with food, and he's on God's side. Let's make him king, and we'll go fight the Romans. That's not the kind of king Jesus wanted to be. With one word, by just saying, okay, Jesus could have been king in Israel right then, that day. But that's not the kind of king Jesus wanted to be. So he breaks the crowd up, he sends them home, and he slips away. Because Jesus' motives were pure. And here's the rub. When we talk about purity and we want to be pure people, we want to be transparent people. Unfortunately, sometimes we use that to actually talk ourselves into doing the wrong thing. Because there's a good thing we want to do. Well, not necessarily we want to do. There's a good thing to do. But we don't want to do it. We'd actually rather do something else. Maybe that something else is bad. Maybe it's just not doing this good thing. And to avoid the chief of all Christian sins, the unforgivable sin, hypocrisy, we won't do that good thing because we don't want to. I don't want to do that. If I do it, I'll be a hypocrite. All right, you know what? I'll talk myself out of it. Now I'm going to go do what I want to do. Because I want to be transparent. I don't want to do that in the first place, and I'll talk myself out of it because I want to be a pure person. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I'll be a hypocrite because I didn't really want to do that. You know what? That's the silliest thing I've ever heard, but we've all done it, right? Talk ourselves into doing what we want to do because we don't want to be hypocritical and do something good even though I don't really want to do it. We claim to be a Christian. You claim to be a Christian, a follower of God, a disciple of God. And that means doing what God asks you to do. So really you're being hypocritical when you don't do what is right. It doesn't matter if you want to or not. In fact, Jesus struggled with this very same thing in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus said, I don't want to do this. You realize that, right? Like Jesus, have you ever thought about this? Jesus and God wanted different things in the garden. Jesus said, take this cup. I don't want to do this thing. In fact, he said, not my will, but yours be done. What does that say? I have a will different than yours. I don't want to do this. But because I claim to be your follower, because I claim to be your servant, I'm going to do it anyway. Because we claim to be followers of God, being pure in heart, being pure, transparent people, means that we live up to that, even if we feel hypocritical at times because we know we don't want to. My thoughts aren't exactly right. My motivations aren't exactly pure, but I know this is what I'm supposed to do. And as a follower of God, keeping in line with my claim to follow Jesus, I have to do it. Pure in heart. Jesus goes on, he says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Jesus had a very distinct philosophy on peacemaking. I mean, we all do, right? Like, especially if you're a parent, you have a distinct philosophy on peacemaking, right? Like, kids are fighting on the floor. One philosophy, break them up, send them to their rooms, separate them, punish them, talk to them, whatever. Other philosophy, they'll work it out. Boys will be boys, just let them go. One of them's got a rock sticking out of their neck. It'll be all right. Just keep letting them go. They'll be all right. They'll work it out. One philosophy, the kids fighting in the back seat, right? Tell them a couple times to be quiet. They can pull over the car. Suddenly they're quiet. Too late. Open the door. Now they're crying. Too bad. And you bring pain, and that silences things. The other philosophy, just turn the music up. All right? One philosophy is, I'll jump in and handle it. The other one is, wait till your father gets home. You're going to be in trouble. All right? We have different philosophies about how to make peace. And Jesus had a distinct idea. He had a distinct philosophy about how to be a peacemaker. And this was it. Do whatever it takes to make peace. Do whatever it takes to make peace. Notice how Jesus lived his life. In fact, right there in Matthew 8, you see it. The leper, as soon as he's healed, Jesus specifically tells him, make sure you go through all the steps to make peace with the community. Make sure you go through all the steps. Make sure you go to the priest. Make sure you bring the offering. Make sure that you show them and they examine you, so that way you can be welcomed back into the synagogue. That way you can be welcomed back into the temple worship. That way you can be welcomed back into Jewish life. Make peace with the community. Do everything it takes. Later, a different text in John chapter 4, Jesus is traveling from Judea to Galilee, and they're separated by a little area known as Samaria. Now, the Jews hated everyone who lived in Samaria because they were half-breeds, they were half-Jewish, they were unclean, they were heretics. We don't want anything to do with them. If you're a good Jewish person, you cross over the Jordan River, you go up the other side, and you jump back over to get into Galilee. All right? Because you don't want anything to do with Samaritans. You hate them, all right? And they hate you. In fact, at one point, because the things get so bad, they sneak into Jerusalem, they sneak into the temple, and they dump a bunch of skulls and dead bones in the temple, which makes it unclean. And I mean, that's how much they hate each other. They're doing terrible, back and forth type of things like that. And Jesus decides to go right through Samaria, and he ends up having a conversation with a Samaritan woman at a well. All right, and he talks theology. This Israelite man talks theology with this Samaritan woman. And the disciples had gone into town, but when they get back, they're surprised, not just to see him talking with a Samaritan, but he's talking with a woman. That's what the text specifically says. You see, in that day, men didn't talk to women who weren't their wives that often. Usually because they believed that there was no point in it, that there was no reason to talk to women at all, really. That wasn't my view, that's their view. All right? And then sometimes it was just too promiscuous. And he just didn't do that. Here's Jesus, an Israelite man, making peace with a Samaritan woman, ends up making peace with a whole Samaritan village and preaching God to them, making peace between these people and their God. See, Jesus didn't let cultural boundaries, he didn't let tradition or past stand in the way between making peace. He did whatever it took. I don't care that we've hated these people for hundreds of years. I don't care about that. They matter to God. I'll do whatever it takes to make peace with them. In fact, Jesus' entire life can be described just as a peacemaking mission. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 18 through 21, he says this, "And all of this is a gift from God, who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us this task of reconciling people to him. For God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sins against them. And he gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So we are Christ's ambassador. God is making through his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. For God made Christ, who had never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God through Christ. Jesus' entire life was about making peace. Like God wanted peace with us so bad that he didn't spare anything. He went to the ultimate extreme and he gave up someone he loved so that we could have peace with him. And if we want to know God, if we want to claim to know God and we want to be God's child, then we have to be willing to go to the same extreme to be a peacemaker. And this means chiefly, I think, in a lot of our lives, giving up the fact of whose fault it was. Who started it? Well, he shouldn't have done that. Well, she shouldn't have said that. Well, they should know better. They're the parents. We have to give up this idea of whose fault it was. Because if God had that idea, none of us would be here. Because it was our fault. He could have said, you know what, I'll wait till they get up here to me. You know, like anyone's going to get up to God. We have to be peacemakers. People who are willing to do whatever it takes to reconcile the people. It's not right that there's division in people's lives. It's not right that people are separated by anger and hate. It's not right that those things go on. And so we as Christians, as a church, as people who claim to follow the ultimate peacemaker say, hey, I'm going to do whatever it takes to reconcile this situation. And ultimately, we do whatever it takes to reconcile people back to God. Because we are children of God. Or children of a peacemaker. And Jesus finishes this all off with an interesting thing. We talked about last week how the first three comments, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, those are kind of bad things. Then he says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. That sounds like a good thing. These first three sound like good things. Blessed are you who are merciful. That's good. We can understand that. Blessed are the pure in heart. Okay, that's good. Blessed are the peacemakers. That's great. Blessed are you when you are persecuted because you do what's right. That doesn't sound good, does it? See, Jesus was persecuted as well. And you think about Jesus, all right? Have you guys ever wondered this? Why was Jesus so hated? Why was he even crucified? Like, wasn't he a good guy? Like, wouldn't you all want to be friends with Jesus? Like, he's always at parties. He's always hanging out with people. He's always friendly. He's always there encouraging. He tells people all the time, you know what? I forgive you. You're forgiven. You know, isn't that like a good guy? Like, wouldn't you want to be his friends? Why was he persecuted? It's because when you live this kind of life, where you are merciful and you are pure and you make peace with anyone who needs it, when you live this kind of life, you end up sometimes in the crosshairs of the majority. Because the majority, a lot of times gets it right, but sometimes they get it wrong. And you'll be willing to stand up for anyone. Here's what I mean by that. The end of 9/11, right after 9/11, Jesus would have been the guy who was standing up for the rights of Muslims. Because they're people too. Because they need to be have peace made with God and with each other, with us. Because he was merciful. Right after World War II, Jesus would have been the guy that would have been rebuilding Germany. They did terrible things, but you know what? They're people too. They still need to have peace made with their God. That would have gotten him in some trouble. You see, today, when you stand up for God, when you are someone who is merciful and wants to make peace and pure in heart, that will sometimes end you up on the taking a stand for the rights of unborn children. And that, no, this isn't right. You know what? You don't have the right, you don't have the choice to say whether this baby will live or die. And that will get you persecuted. And sometimes because we want to be this type of people, because we want to be a Christian who follows Jesus and is a disciple of God, sometimes that will get us in the crosshairs. Because we'll stand up for things that are out of favor with the culture, with the majority. And that will get you persecuted. But then Jesus says, blessed are you who are persecuted for doing what's right. You're in a good situation. Your circumstances are favorable when you're persecuted for doing what's right. Why? Because they persecuted Jesus. And if they persecute you in the same way, that must mean you look an awful lot like he did. And there's no one else I would really look rather look like than Jesus. So blessed are you, because you are following in the path of the greatest man who ever lived, Jesus Christ, when you are persecuted for doing what is right. And let me tell you, if you do follow Jesus, if you do claim to be a follower of God, that will happen. Persecution will happen, but be glad when it does, because that means you're doing something right. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for just being who you are, the all-powerful, all-knowing. God, thank you for caring about what happens to us and not turning a blind eye. God, I ask that you give us the strength today to be people who are full of mercy and compassion, people who are full of purity, and who want to make peace above all else. That, God, we can be a people who stand for your truth, even if that puts us with the minority, even if that puts us with the persecuted. We love you so much, Father, and we just ask for the strength to be your people in this world. And we ask this in your Son's name. Amen.